Welcome to the Published Author Podcast, where we help entrepreneurs learn how to write a book and leverage it to grow their business and make an impact. I'm your host, Josh Steimle. Today, our guest is Chris Ducker. Chris is a serial entrepreneur and author of the best-selling books Virtual Freedom and Rise of the Edupreneur. Based in Cambridge, England, he owns and operates several businesses, including the personal brand education company Edupreneur.com. And together, his businesses house or hire or employ over 350 full-time employees. And nowadays, he spends most of his time coaching and mentoring successful entrepreneurs, as well as investing in and advising startup companies. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man. It's good to talk with you.
Yep. So this is not the first time that Chris and I have talked to each other, but the last time we talked, he was in the Philippines and I was in China. Now we're a little bit closer together. He's in Cambridge, England, and I'm just outside of Cambridge, US in Massachusetts. So we're getting closer and closer together here. And one of these days we'll actually meet in person.
Even if it's just by city name, we're there. We're pretty close to each other already.
Right. We just need one of those Star Trek transportation devices and we could meet in person in Cambridge. Geeks unite.
Right out the gate, we're going geeky. I love it.
All right. So Chris, for those of our audience who don't know who you are and don't know your history, tell us a little bit about where you grew up and where you're from and how you got to be an entrepreneur. What's your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, man. Well, yeah, I was born and raised in London, here in England, Wimbledon, to be precise. About 10 minutes away from Centre Court was where I was brought into the world, as my Irish mother would have told me. Looking back on it, I guess I started to have those entrepreneurial tendencies probably around my mid-teens. We over in the United States, you call them garage sales. We call them car boot sales here in the UK. And we used to do it. So the difference between the two, and for some of your listeners that are in the United States, this may or may not be a totally brilliant piece of advice or information, or it could be completely worthless, but I'll give it up anyway. So in the US, when you do a garage sale, as you guys call them, you physically walk from house to house fundamentally, and you go into people's garages and their driveways and you buy stuff that they don't want anymore. Here, we don't really do the garage thing. We call them garage, which is way worse sounding than the garage that you utilize. But garages here in the UK are not really that widespread. And so what we do is we basically pack everything in the back of a car and we head to like a playing field or community center or, something like that. And everybody kind of uses those, you get those foldable tables that you use when you're kind of putting wallpaper up on your wall. So you get one of those tables out the back of your car, you put all your junk on there and people come to you. And there's usually a couple of hundred people all on this playing field. And that was kind of like my first, and I'm trying to set the scene here, my first kind of foray, I guess, into entrepreneurship, and particularly selling and negotiating, which is a big part of being an entrepreneur. And so, and the thing was, we never had an issue selling stuff at all. Like I could sell ice cubes to a snowman. I'm not worried about that. But what my dad didn't like, because I used to go with my father, I would take the profits that we made and then I would go around buying other stuff and negotiating to get cheaper prices from other people around, bring that stuff back, put a little sticker on it and sell it for more profit. So he always wanted to pack up early and head back and watch the football on TV. But I was all about making that money, baby. So that was really kind of like the first start, I think.
And this was in the days before eBay. So you were literally selling this face to face.
Pretty much, yeah. It was all face to face. And I'll never forget one day, this is God's honest truth story. I was walking around and I picked up this green ceramic elephant. I mean, the junk that some people have in their homes, right? And I negotiated the price down for this little ceramic elephant. I think it was like £1.50 or something, which is a couple of bucks. And I brought it back to our store and I marked it up at like £3.50 or whatever it was. About an hour later, this gentleman strolls by and buys it. And as he's leaving, he says, "My wife will be so happy. She's over there on our stall, and she's got one of these. So now we'll have a pair and we can take them home. And I was like, I've literally just sold this thing back to this guy.
I bet his wife was thrilled.
Stories to tell. So good. Such a great story. So yeah, that was always kind of like, I guess, the beginning more than anything else. And as you go through, the teens and, I quit college about 6 months in, went into sales and marketing full-time at a publishing company, only ever had 3 jobs in my life. And, fast forward to your late 20s, been in sales and marketing for over a decade, open up my own company. And the rest is a little bit of entrepreneurial history, as they say.
So what was your first company that you started, your first legit company?
Yeah, well, it's still up and running to this day. It's a company called Live to Sell. It's a call center facility that's based over there in the Philippines. We have about 330 employees full time around the clock, and we are fundamentally a B2B customer service and appointment setting company. That's what we do for businesses, predominantly actually in the US and the UK. And so we started that company with 15 employees in 2004, I think it was. And here we are now all these years later. We had our best year ever last year. This year been a little tough because of
as it has been for many people.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. We're not kind of tiptoeing along bankruptcy or anything like that. Far from it. But I think it's because of because we've been around so long, and because we were very smart with the investments that we made from a business perspective. We've got no debt, no creditors, all that sort of stuff. Like, we've done well to get through the year without any major issues and still make some money. I know there are a lot of people in the same game who have had to close their doors because they just haven't set things up as well as us. But that comes from experience as well. If we'd have opened the doors 5 years ago, we probably would have had to close ours this year as well, because it comes down to experience. So yeah, that's the big one. And then we have Virtual Staff Finder, which is the VA recruiting company where we help entrepreneurs fundamentally find virtual assistants to work with them. That's been up and running for almost 11 years now. And then there's Edupreneur and everything that kind of, personifies that brand with our live conference, our coaching programs, the books, and, everything else that we do.
So you lived in the Philippines for a while. You just recently moved back to Europe. How long were you there in the Philippines?
Almost 18 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Almost 18 years, long time. Most of my adult life over there. Originally went out on a contract to work with one of the international banks, kind of close that contract up and open up my own firm. And the rest, like I say, is very much history to a certain degree. That being said, we're happy to be back in the UK. And, I met my wife in the Philippines. So this is very new to her, although we've been back now a couple of years. She's more than settled now. But, we've got our kids here. Our businesses are still up and running in the Philippines. They've done great. We still go back regularly. But, this is where we wanted to be. This is where we wanted to be for the kids and for ourselves as well. So we're very happy to be back where we are, and bought a beautiful home in the English countryside. And I now get to sip English tea on a regular basis and don't have to have it imported.
How has living overseas changed you or affected your career as an entrepreneur? I know that for me, I've lived in Brazil and Asia, and getting that perspective on a different culture has really changed me as a person. It's changed me as an author, as an entrepreneur. How have you seen that affect you and help you?
I think, well, ever since I got involved with sales and marketing in my career, late teens, early 20s, I was always doing business on a quote unquote international setting. And so I was thrown in at the deep end very much so by selling classified ad space into Europe. That was my first role. And so time zones, international dialing codes, all these things, probably much like you, anybody that's spent any amount of time working outside of their native country, these things are very simple, very easy. Currencies, everything. I can, pretty much round things up very easily. So I was already kind of adapt to a certain degree to working internationally. But when you actually live, and particularly for that period of time, yes, it will change you for sure. I lost a lot of my very stern sort of British sort of mannerisms and all the rest of it. Became a little bit more transatlantic in the way that I use my slang and things like that, particularly due to the fact that we have so many clients in the United States, so many coaching clients over there. I travel there. I speak there very regularly. So, yeah, I often joke to say that, I'm the most un-British Brit that you'll ever meet, probably. But I am a very proud Brit, and I've never lost that. And I think that comes through in my writing as an author, in my style as an entrepreneur and as a leader. And I think overall, it's opened up a lot of doors. I mean, you never know what would have happened if I hadn't have done it, but I'm happy that I spent the time overseas. I believe it has made me, the person I am today.
Likewise for me. I think it's a great experience. I think everybody should do it. So what was the point at which you decided to become an author? You were running this business and then you said, I'm going to write a book. What was that?
Well, I've always been a big reader anyway. And I think that, as time has gone by, I've always had a book. When I was living in the UK, in Wimbledon, having to travel up to, Pimlico, which is kind of 4 or 5 stops on the underground, you always had a book with you. I mean, the mobile phones weren't a thing back in those days. You couldn't kind of just stare at a screen for your commute to work. So I was always reading books, and I've always had books around me. And to this day, I prefer real books. I listen to audiobooks every now and then. I never read ebooks because I don't like screens as a whole. So I'll never read a book on a screen ever. But there's something about putting what you know, particularly from a nonfiction perspective, right? So, we're talking about being a published entrepreneurial author. There's something about putting that expertise into one volume that somebody can pick up and almost springboard their own journey based on what you're teaching them, that a blog post will never do, a podcast will never do, a video will never do. It had to be the book. And so I had started podcasting and blogging in January of 2010. And late 2012, I got an email from a publisher based out of Dallas, Texas. And they were like, we love your content on outsourcing and VAs. That there's a big hole, there's a big gap in the market for a book on the subject. Tim Ferriss laid down the tracks with the 4-hour work week and the whole outsourcing life section in that book. We've scoured the internet. You've come up on more than one occasions when it comes to this topic. Will you write a book for us? We'll publish it for you. In the end, I didn't go with that publisher. But
that's pretty nice though when the publisher comes
totally.
to you.
And if I'm to be honest, did I ever think in myself, would I like to write a book someday? Yes, of course I thought about it. As a lover of books, I think everybody does genuinely, right? Particularly again in non-fiction, definitely, where you've got something to share, whether it be your experiences, your expertise, your stories, whatever it is, right? And so I'd always fancied doing it. Then the opportunity came along. I found a great agent that was based in New York. We put together like a 12-page proposal. We wrote the first chapter of the book. We shipped it to 16 publishers around the United States, and we got 4 offers, which is 3 more than the 4-hour work week got, Tim, if you're listening. I just want to put it out there. And I actually ended up going with the second best offer in regards to advance. And that was because I really felt like these guys got me and what the title was all about. And so Virtual Freedom came out in April of 2014 and has done incredible. It has brought so much business my way. I can't even put a dollar amount on it, Josh. If I had to make a guess over the 6 years since it's been published, how much money it's made me, I would say close to $1 million, probably.
And of course, we're not talking about book sales here. We're talking about the benefit to your business, right? Exactly.
Now, I've sold, that book has sold probably close to about 100,000 copies across the 3 different mediums that it's in, meaning paperback, audiobook, Kindle, right? So we've sold a ton of books. I've made some good money on it. Don't get me wrong. Well over 1,000 5-star reviews on Amazon. And it continues to sell. Every quarter I get a check. And I'm like, wow, it's crazy, right? But it's the business that's come my way because obviously I own a VA business as well. It was a no-brainer for people to pick that book up, learn what they needed to do, and then say, well, I can either carry on doing what I'm already doing and being overwhelmed and not really getting anywhere. That's not much of an option. Or I can follow the advice in this book and go out and find a VA and build my virtual team. Or option C is I can use the author's company to help me do it. And so we've got a ton. I had to double our team about 3 or 4 months after that book came out, literally doubled the number of the team working on that business because we had so much business come in from it. And so it's been an incredible addition to our business with the VA side of things. And then
So real quick, before you go on, getting really tactical and practical here, how did you drive people from the book to your business? Did you have a specific set of pages or pitch within the book that you said, hey, I run a business doing this. You can hire my business. Come here to this URL. Like, how exactly did you move those people from the book to being customers?
That's a really, really good question. And here was the thing. I didn't want to be pushy or tacky about it. I did want to be strategic, but I didn't want to be seen to be strategic, if that makes sense, right? And so I think in all of the 280 or something pages in the book, I think we mentioned the company like 4 times, 5 times, something like that. And it was just very kind of in a very kind of nonchalant sort of backhanded manner where we would just kind of drop it in conversation in a paragraph or something. But, and this I know for sure is the big deal closer. At the back of the book, we had a resources section. And we said, all the things, in fact, actually at the beginning of the book, I said, you're going to see lots and lots of resources mentioned throughout the pages of this book. To save you time skimming back through all of the pages to find them when you're done reading it, I've put them all at the back in a nice, convenient list for you, along with website addresses, what it's for, et cetera, et cetera. So, if you ever need resources, just go to the back of the book. Don't try finding it in one of the almost 300 pages. So right at the back, there's that resource section. And right at the beginning of that resource section, it is, hey, you've just read Virtual Freedom. Thank you so much. I hope the book has helped you. If you want a little more help, if you want some more practical exercises and examples that you can work on and learn from, then we actually have a companion guide to the book that you can download for free. All you need to do is go to this URL and go ahead and get it. Now, 2 things happened. Number 1, we were genuinely providing massive amounts of additional value there, huge amounts of value. I think it was like a 30-page document or something with, they could print it out and fill it all out. And there was stuff from within the book that they had to kind of go through in a very kind of structured manner. And then there was extra stuff that wasn't in the book as well. So everybody loved it. But secondly, to get the book, we needed their email address. Now, obviously, when somebody buys your book on Amazon doesn't tell you their email address, right? And they probably never will. So we needed a way to be able to say, hey, if you got the book, that's great, but how can we continue to serve these people? And more importantly, as a business, how can we make money out of it? And so we created that companion guide, and it's worked brilliantly. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people who have opted in for it over the last 6 years since it's come out. And, many of them have converted to paying clients.
I love this. And I want to emphasize this point that you could have just put a URL on there and said, hey, I run a company that does this. If you're interested, go to this link. But instead, what you did is you said, I've got more for you. If you want it, come and get it here. Yeah. And then they had to give the email address. And then you've got them. You've got them on your list.
Don't get me wrong.
A lot of information.
It's not as if we didn't mention the company in that resource section as well. Mm-hmm. We did, along with other viable options for them to be able to help or find help with getting their VAs on board. So, we weren't shining, a tiny little spotlight on it singularly. We were saying, hey, there's a whole bunch of different options. This is one of them, plus here are some others. But yeah, it was without a doubt, the companion guide has been the big game changer on that side of things.
Awesome. Now, before we go on, because I want to talk about your next book as well and what you're doing now, but you've done a lot of public speaking. Were you doing public speaking before you published Virtual Freedom, or did the book mostly come first and then lead to the speaking that you did?
No, I was speaking. I can't remember the exact number of gigs that I had done in that couple of years. I think my first speaking gig within kind of the online business industry was probably very late in 2011. The book came out, like I said, April 2014. So certainly had, probably at that point, I would have thought maybe a dozen or so gigs under my belt within the industry as a whole. But when the book came out, the big thing that I did, I wanted to do some signings. And because it was traditionally published, and the second book is self-published, we can get into that. But because it was traditionally published, I knew that I could get it into bookstores, and I knew that I needed to do that ultimately in the first 6 months. Like, if I was to get the option to be able to do some signings and things like that, and predominantly in the United States. So basically what we did is I think I did like a 10 gig speaking tour and it, funnily enough, it ended up starting off in Sydney, Australia, when Darren Rouse booked me at the Pro Blogger event, which wasn't on the list to begin with. So I ended up going from Philippines to Sydney to LA, Vegas, Philadelphia, New York. I mean, it was crazy. I bounced around like a madman for about 6 weeks, and ended up doing a whole bunch of, traditional media and radios and all that kind of stuff about it as well. But really, it was so that I could do some signings and do some additional gigs specifically on the book. And for sure, I mean, I was able to work into my speaker riders, my contracts, that everybody in the audience as a keynote speaker was going to get a copy of the book. So then I sold, 1,000 bulk copies here, 2,000 here, 500 there, kind of thing. And it certainly helped shift a whole bunch of books in that first year, for sure.
After you wrote that book, Virtual Freedom, did you see an uptick in the number of speaking engagements that people were reaching out for? I mean, what did that do for you in terms of your speaking career?
I saw I tell you what, I didn't see really an uptick in terms of volume of invites, but what I did see was an uptick in quality of the events, which I'm all about. If anybody knows me, I'd rather have quality over quantity any day of the week. And so you get paid more up front, you get a better audience, you sell more books, you close more business, and so on and so on and so on. So yeah, maybe not a volume uptake, but definitely quality for sure. I think just being a published author and getting your book out there, even if you're self-publishing it, ultimately is like, it ends up being like a $20 business card, literally. And it's easily probably one of the easiest and one of the fastest ways, especially if you're self-publishing, to ultimately position yourself as an expert within your niche. And I think that's what a lot of people don't actually get. They don't see it. They don't understand it. They see all the work involved in getting the book together and getting it out there. And they think, oh, I've got to sell the book now. Yeah, you do need to sell the book, but also if you self-publish it, particularly, you can get books printed for practically nothing, and you can use them as lead generation tools for you to be able to sign more B2B, B2C, coaching clients, whatever it might be. And so there's massive amounts of opportunity in not just book sales, but everything that happens after that book is published as well. Perfect.
So take us to where you started thinking about your next book. What was the inspiration for that? What was the key motivation?
That was probably actually more strategic than the first one, if I'm to be honest. So around probably late 2014, after the first book had come out, wrapping up that year, I came up with the term Edupreneur for the first time. I had been doing a keynote over the latter part of that year called The Business of You. Probably at that point, I'd done it maybe half a dozen times around the world. And it was really, really resonating, particularly with entrepreneurial audiences, and even more so particular, those within that industry that were ultimately focused on building a business based around their experience or their expertise, their career standing, whatever you want to put it, reputation, whatever. And so the term Edupreneur was born, and then about a year later, we opened up the doors to the Edupreneur Academy, which was our membership, where we kind of taught people how to be able to build up a profitable personal brand and all the rest of it. Now, what happened was early 2016, it became very apparent to us when we surveyed our first kind of onslaught of members. We had about 250 people join in the space of a couple of months. So right out of the gate, we were doing very well in terms of member numbers, but I could see that they weren't watching you get the analytics on the back end. They weren't watching the videos that they should be watching, or they weren't watching enough of them. And so we surveyed our guys and we were like, what's going on? What's the matter? And they said, well, it's just, there's so much in there. What I've watched is great, but I don't know where to go. Like, I'm just overwhelmed. You need to give us a bit of a step-by-step here to kind of get us out there. And I realized, honestly, I just thrown them all in at the deep end and said, hey, watch what you want, when you want, choose your own adventure kind of thing. And that was a bad move on my part. And so early 2016, we relaunched the portal and did the whole Edupreneur 2.0 thing with a roadmap. And what we had found by putting all of the content into these 3 or 4 different categories, we were ultimately creating the perfect setup for the second book, because everything was going into either build, market, monetize, or growth when it comes to building that expert-paced business. And that's exactly, if you pick up a copy of Rise of the Edupreneur, which is the book, you'll see that I've actually broken it up into those main sections with several chapters for each section. And that's exactly what the kind of the catalyst was for the book to come about. Now, I decided to self-publish this one, even though I easily could have got it traditionally sold off the back of the success of Virtual Freedom. But I decided to go self-publishing with this for 2 reasons. First and foremost, it was going to be much, much faster. And in late 2017, we were due to do the inaugural Edupreneur Summit conference in London. And I wanted to gift it to all of my attendees as a thank you. So that was kind of like the driving factor. There was no way that book was going to be available by then if we'd have gone the traditional route, because it takes 12, 18 months usually for a book on average to get out traditionally. The second reason was that ultimately, by self-publishing the book as somebody who was then doing exactly what I was teaching in the book in terms of profiting on your expertise, I was the ultimate guinea pig fundamentally. And people really resonated with that. They were like, well, if you can do it and it looks like this, then there's no reason why we can't do it. And so we did. We got the book out. It's done incredibly, incredibly well. But I think it's made me probably 4 times as much money as a lead generation source than it has done from a royalty perspective. And that's saying something, considering obviously you self-publish, you make a lot more money on the royalty side of it. But again, it's just a great source for bringing additional business your way,
Perfect. I love that you go through the contrast there of the traditional versus the self-publishing route and the pros and cons there, because this is what's coming up with a lot of other people I talk to, is even people who have traditionally published multiple times and they could easily get a book deal with an advance, they're still opting to self-publish because they say, I can't wait 2 years for my book to come out. Especially people in a technology field, they're saying by the time the book comes out, it's going to be outdated. I need to get this stuff out now. Yeah. But and then, I mean, you do give up the royalties too. If you traditionally publish, the publisher comes along and they'll take 80-90%.
And not just that, I mean, when I did Virtual Freedom, I gave up freaking everything. I was just your typical novice, rookie author that kind of was just like, wow, I got a book deal. I'm going to write a book. This is going to be great. And I gave up the international rights. I gave up the audiobook rights. And hey, audiobooks, that's money right there. And if you're a podcaster like me, if you're not recording your own book, then you're just dumb. There's no other word to describe it. And so second time round, I knew I was going to keep everything. And that has obviously led us to more opportunities internationally with the international market. Virtual Freedom's done okay internationally. There are several foreign language editions out already, but it just goes to show you that was 6 years ago. Edupreneur just a couple of years ago, and we're already kind of almost level pegging in regards to that side of things. And obviously with Rise of the Edupreneur, I did record the audiobook myself. With Virtual Freedom, I didn't, because my publisher, while I was on that speaking tour, actually the year it came out, was like, we got to get the audiobook out. People are asking for it. When can you, we'll get you into a studio in LA or New York or somewhere, like you're here, like, let's do it now. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm doing 10 gigs in 6 weeks. I don't have the voice to go into a booth for 10, 12 hours and record this book. Like, you just have to wait until I get back to the Philippines. I know recording studios over there. I'll be able to get in and do it. No, we must do it now. And so I was bulldozed into allowing a voice actor to come in and read it. And he did a horrifically horrible job.
Oh, that's a shame. Especially since you have such a great voice.
I know. I've never truly, honestly forgiven myself for not standing my ground on that, because I never ask people to buy the audiobook, ever. I always tell them pick up the paperback or the Kindle. I outwardly tell them avoid the audiobook. You'll get the wrong experience. So I don't want to have to do that about one of my own books ever. So I'm glad I did everything myself the second time around.
You ever thought about going back and re-recording it yourself?
Not at this point. I think that ship has sailed by now. And you look at your numbers, you look at the sales when you get your royalty statements come through. Probably something around 60% of sales are on ebook, Kindle version. About another 10, probably about another 20 or 25% are on paperback, and the rest are audio. It's really not honestly worth it right now.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever thought about going and rewriting the book? I mean, not rewriting, but updating the book. It's been since 2014. A lot's changed with technology, social media and such. And I'm sure that's impacted the virtual assistant arena.
It has. You're right. And I have thought about it once or twice when I've been approached by the publishers to do it. But if I'm to be honest with you, 2 times they've talked to me about it. I've gone back and actually picked up the book and genuinely gone through it again. There's not much other than a few resource mentions for different software or services. Other than that, there's actually not that much in the book that would be deemed out of date. Not at this point anyway. And so I kind of feel like an extended or an updated edition right now is not really needed. I will never close the door on that, because I'm still very passionate about that project and about that as a, I guess, as a talking point or as a solution to people's problems in regards to building virtual teams. And people call it the Bible of virtual assistants and the definitive guide and the encyclopedia and all these great terms. But maybe I'll update it at some point. I just don't feel like it's really needed right now above and beyond anything else.
It would be an interesting experiment, though, to see if you released Virtual Freedom 2.0, what would happen to the sales from that, just because it would be a newer book, and just the perception of, hey, this book is from 2020 or 2021 instead of 2014. So I'll be really interested to see what happens when you do that at some point in the future.
I will. I like the way you're just assuming the close there, like it's going to happen. I think the only way, honestly, Josh, the only way that I would consider doing it would be if I was able to get those rights reverted back to me so that I could self-publish it. And I don't think the publisher is likely to do that anytime soon, due to the fact that the book is still selling quite well. Yeah. So if I was to get the rights back and I could do it myself and self-publish it, then it would be more commercially viable to me. But yeah, I wouldn't do it to line somebody else's pockets, not at this point in my career.
Yeah. See, kids, this is why you self-publish, so you can keep the rights and you have this latitude. Now Chris is locked into this with this publisher 6 years later. But well, this is interesting. So with the Edupreneur business that you're doing right now, do you have any plans for a next book that you might write next?
I do. And I've been planning it for probably the last 2 years or so. There are pages and pages and pages of notes. And it might come as a little bit of a surprise for people to learn that it's actually not going to be a book for entrepreneurs, not per se, not directly anyway. I've got to the point where I think in my career, I've got enough experience under my belt now where I can write, should we say, a slightly bigger book, bigger idea, a bigger thought process, a bigger message. There's nothing wrong with the 2 books I've written. They provide a number of different solutions to people's problems in very different aspects of building a business in today's world. One being building virtual and remote teams, another one, marketing yourself as the business, not being stuck in it, but marketing yourself as that personal brand business owner, which is obviously becoming more and more popular with every passing month right now. But the next one is going to be actually more along the lines of business relationships. And it's going to be one of those books where it's not just sold to entrepreneurs. This is the book that I want to utilize to get myself into the Aston Martin AGM as their keynote closing speaker kind of thing. And this is hey, here's, 3,000 copies for your entire company. Thank you, Mr. Branson. That sort of type of thing. And that's the next level, and that's why I'm not rushing it. There are very unique stories, very unique tales. It could potentially even be a parable, a whole kind of who moved my cheese sort of type thing, possibly. So, yeah, we'll see what happens with it, but definitely in the planning process. There's no definitive date in place because first and foremost, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I build businesses. Secondly, I'm an author, educator, and everything else. So there are definitely higher priorities, but I certainly want to be able to get it out there at some point very soon for sure.
Cool. Well, before we wrap up here, Chris, are there any final words of wisdom that you would pass along to that entrepreneur out there who's listening to this saying, I want to write a book. I think a book would be great for my business. What 1 or 2 tips would you pass along to them?
Well, I would say, look, if you've been creating any amount of content for any period of time online already, whether it be blogging, podcasting, video, whatever, the chances are you've got a lot of the content that you need for the book already. You just have to rework it so that it works in a book format. And the first thing that I hear from people when I suggest that to them, they say, well, why would somebody buy a book from me where, 70% of it is up on my YouTube channel or on my blog already? And it's a very easy answer to give, and that is for convenience. Plain simple. Why would you expect somebody to read, I don't know, 50 blog posts that are 1,000 words each over just buying a book for $14-15 and reading it all over the course of their long weekend away on holiday or something, right? So I think that a lot of people, when they start thinking about writing a book, particularly for the first time, they become a little overwhelmed in terms of that process of writing. But look at what you've already got and see how much of it you can actually utilize already. And then, just fill in the gaps ultimately. And my big piece of advice, whether you go traditional or whether you self-publish, you must hire a developmental editor to work with you on the book. This isn't an editor per se, where, more along the lines of an inline editor who will check for spelling and punctuation and grammar and all that stuff. Yeah, you should definitely get somebody to look over that side of things as well. But this is a developmental editor, someone that can actually read the book chapter by chapter and help you develop a better book. I've done that on both of my books, and I can very honestly say that both of them turned out to be much, much better books by utilizing the services of somebody to help me develop, flush extra ideas out, go deeper on a few different examples or case studies or stories. Much better books at the end of the day if I hadn't have done so and just gone ahead and published straight away.
So valuable. Such good advice. Chris, thanks so much for being with us here today. What's the best place for people to find you?
Well, I wouldn't be much of a personal brand business coach if I didn't have chrisducker.com. So that is the place to go. And I'm at Chris Ducker on all the socials.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you, man. And it's great to chat with you again.
It is. It's so good to talk again. I hope we can meet in person soon someday.
You got it.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to spread the word, please give us a 5-star rating review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. And if you're an entrepreneur interested in writing and publishing a nonfiction book to grow your business and make an impact, visit publishedauthor.com for show notes for this podcast and other free resources.